OH?
I-O.
OH?
I-O.
Man, that feels good to come home and see that, right? You know, I'm championing the Buckeyes up in Washington, D.C. You know, I just want you to know everybody hated us, you know what I'm saying? But I wear my Ohio State hat everywhere I go. And so I always wear the flag, and I'm an adamant Browns fan. There's a Browns backers bar in Washington, D.C. where I hang out frequently. And so a lot of Cleveland people, or Cleveland-esque people. It's so funny. Most people I meet from Cleveland aren't from Cleveland proper, outside of Cleveland. And so, but we'll take everybody. You know, it's funny when you're here on the ground, it's just like, I'm from Shaker or I'm from, you know, some other suburb. And then we have this like conflict, but outside of like the Cleveland area, we're all a big Cleveland family. And so I'm thankful to be a part of that ecosystem. Interesting thing is, I don't know where to start because I'm so full of information and I have so much to share with all of you. But I want to start from this point. You know, God has blessed me. Amen. You know, and I truly want to give all credit and honor to God. Because I have my cousin Tracy here, I'm gonna put him on the spot, you know. And it's important because seeing Tracy, you know, he knows where our family's from. You know, I'm the young guy in the family, and I spent a lot of my childhood on 79th and Houghton. I had two grandmothers that lived on the same street, and was blessed to grow up in that community because I got to be with real everyday people and full of love. You know, not perfect individuals, but full of love. But what they put on my heart and what has been my North Star is wanting to create change. You know, I didn't even get to see that community at its height. You know, we played in a lot of abandoned houses and, you know, jumped on top of mattresses that were dumped out in the neighborhood. And, you know, I even got jumped once out there as a 7-year-old. But it was a community because when I did get jumped, you know, I went to my first grandmother, which is my mother's mother, my granny, who's always been bedridden since I knew her. She's in heaven now. And I went to my granny, and she was like, take him down the street to Myrna, which is my mother's mother. And so they took my shoes too. And so, you know, my grandma, she put on her coat, and then we started walking up the street, and I just felt just powerful. And grandma knew all of those guys' grandparents and stuff like that. And I got my shoes back, and I never had any problems with them. But, you know, she was an anchor for me, you know, and important to me because I spent a lot of time there because, you know, I grew up in the disconnection. You know, I grew up in a community that was affected by the crack cocaine epidemic. You know, it took my mother over and that's what led me to being raised by my father. But having my grandmother as an anchor brought my mother back in my life. So I'm thankful for God for that, right? I'm also thankful for my mother's story because she showed perseverance and commitment to not only me, but my sister. And because of that, I had a very loving, untraditional family makeup. But I had a mother and father that were with me all along the way. Because certainly I did fall and got back up a couple different times, and that anchoring is what helped me get to where I'm at today. And so I'm thankful, and that's why I give all glory to God. Amen. But it's important, and you're gonna, I mean, some of you are gonna join me at the City Club, so you're gonna hear me talk about this maybe in different ways. But I think it's important to understand that social background, because having spent 20 years in Washington, I can tell you there's not many people that come from these environments and get to advocate and tell the story. That's right. All right? And at the end of the day, in order for us to make some real change, because that's my North Star. You know, when I see, I'm in the White House, or, you know, opportunities that I've had to ride with the president in the Beast, which is his limo, you know, I'm just like, wow. You know, it was just 10 years ago, I was down in the hole with my dad, you know, talking to his colleagues he grew up with, and talking about a day that I never knew about back in the 60s when they first got these blue collar jobs, you know, and started making money and started working up the middle class before drugs hit a lot of these communities. And so that encourages me to humble myself, one, and two, always fight for the people that I came from, and always take every moment to do whatever you can to change that ecosystem. And so that's been my North Star. And because of the blessings of God, I've been able to help create an ecosystem, infrastructure. You know, you heard a couple different things. You heard about opportunity zones. You heard about criminal justice reform. But I'm going to break a couple of things down for you, because I think the most important part of this program here is this key term that I love called discussion. I'm not a person who kind of likes to just talk to people. I like to dialogue, because we have to build understanding and trust with each other. That's where we start. And what I hope to get out of that, as I told the leaders in the other room, is a strategy for the city. You know, because we don't need opportunity tomorrow. We need opportunity right now for our communities. And I need your help in order to actualize that on the ground. Because all of the federal infrastructure we have is well and good, but it means nothing if it doesn't touch people. All right? So when I first joined the White House, one of the first things I worked on, having went to a historically black college and university, Howard University, we set out on partnering with those institutions. HBCUs, in many cases, sit in distressed communities and can be leveraged as a hub, for lack of a better word, to help create connectivity for people who are in search of opportunity. And so when I wrote the White House opportunity, the White House executive order for HBCUs, it was really focused on three things. One, pipeline to college, creating a pipeline to college or to the workforce, pipeline from college to the workforce or to entrepreneurship, and having the infrastructure to do so. And so we got beat up a lot for doing the executive order, which was kind of crazy, because it was like, oh, the president's not really committed to HBCUs. But I can tell you, 3 years later, people are singing a different tune, because HBCUs have gotten the biggest funding increase that they've received in over 20 years, over $100 million of capital. And just this week, we just passed legislation that made permanent $255 million worth of funding to these institutions. And so we're aggressively working to leverage the institutions that are in opportunity zones to kind of drive progress to the ground. You know, I was just recently at North Carolina A&T, and they have a manufacturing plant right outside of the school, and that manufacturing plant incubates individuals who are in engineering programs to go start their own manufacturing facility. And see, these are the type of ideas that a place like Cleveland could easily initialize with the right strategy, with the right people, and the right commitment. But it all starts out with intentionality. And so 3 years ago, we were very intentional on what we wanted to do with HBCUs. And as a result, there's a whole ecosystem and movement of people that are just talking about these institutions in a very bipartisan way. The second thing that I worked on, because I wrote 7 executive orders for the president, but the second thing I worked on was the Crime Prevention and Reentry Council. That set up my relationship with Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. Jared Kushner being one of the president's son-in-law, but also one of the senior advisors. And what we did with that is that we wanted to have a two-pronged strategy. We wanted to create ecosystem, jobs, and opportunities for people so that they wouldn't end up in the criminal justice system. And then for people who were coming home from prisons, I call them homecomers, people that were coming home had opportunities when they got out of prison. Because I can tell you, coming from these communities, some of the most brightest people I've ever met in my life, you know, but they end up in the system because they worked. Sometimes they didn't get the blessings that I had, having that family infrastructure to kind of catch me, you know, when I fell, you know, and that's why as a community, we kind of got to be there to help lift those individuals up. But it's helpful if we have infrastructure that gives a cadre of different opportunities, whether it's jobs, you know, entry-level manufacturing jobs, or pathways to start a job or be an entrepreneur. You know, I can't tell you how many people I grew up around that wanted to be entrepreneurs that had no idea how to start. And then there were no role models. And so the only entrepreneurs they saw wasn't selling good products that were legal and detrimental to the community. That's how a lot of people got caught up in this drug market. But we can reverse that. We can reverse it with the infrastructure that we have. We can reverse it with the infrastructure that the governor has. We can reverse it with the local infrastructure we have here if we all continue to work together.
That's right.
That effort led to criminal justice reform. And so after we did that executive order, we started working with leaders like Hakeem Jeffries, you know, Bobby Scott, people like Cedric Richmond. At that point, Cedric Richmond was the head of the Congressional Black Caucus. And I was able to build a relationship with them, build trust, you know, and then we can work in good faith, have a real conversation about what could work, what I agree on, what they agree on,
That's right.
And how can we move the needle. And you know what came of that? Criminal justice reform. Over 3,000 people came home from the crack cocaine and powder cocaine sentenced to this 90% of those people were African American.
Wow, that's right.
We no longer have the 3 strike laws, so it no longer has mandatory minimums. You know, so if a person commits a 3rd crime, they're not locked up for life. That's reduced down to 20 years. You know, if a person creates a 2nd offense, you know, they're not doing 20 years, they're doing 15. You know, we're doing things like low-level drug offenders who get caught up in the system being a drug mule. You know, we're going to look at their criminal history, and if it's their first time, give them some flexibility to kind of reform themselves and turn their life around. But the biggest piece that people don't talk about is reforming the prison system itself. That's right. Our prison system for too long has just warehoused people, and they become better criminals. You know, then they come out, and what happens? They victimize more people and go back. And so we have a high rate of people returning to prison. They have a fancy word for it called recidivism, right? So the goal of the first step back was to reduce the recidivism rate by, instead of having a one-size-fits-all approach on people, we take an individualized approach. We look at their criminal background, we look at what skills they need or issues they have to deal with to reduce their rate of recidivism. Is it mental health? Is it drug rehabilitation? Is it family reunification? Is it just getting a job or a skill? And if you're willing to participate in those programs, then what we'll do is award that person time that they can come home early. And if you get to the minimum to low risk category for recidivism rates, you can spend some of your time in home confinement. And so that's revolutionary. I mean, everything from incentives for being able to save in your bank account while you're in prison and use those funds to pay your fees and fines or get your license taken care of when you get out, or to buy a home, or to invest in your family. That infrastructure didn't exist. And now that infrastructure exists. And not only that, the last time we did criminal justice reform in the 90s, and they locked up many people of color, they did that all across the country in every state. So now we're seeing the reverse. We're seeing every state now taking steps to figure out how they can reform their prison system. Because most of us, most people of color, most people are locked up in our state prisons. You know, millions of people are locked up in our state prisons. So that means millions of families don't have a dad or don't have a mom, you know. And that's critical if we're talking about infrastructure and opportunity for our children and the next generation. And then the odds of a person going to prison is drastically increased if their parents are already in the prison, you know. So we're talking about these distressed communities. And so President Trump, through his leadership, is focused on creating an ecosystem for second chance hiring. You know, we put over $500 million on second chance hiring. We've invested in everything from the federal bonding program, which gives some liability coverage to businesses that hire homecomers, to everything from creating job fairs at the Bureau of Prisons, everything from doing Pell Grants in the federal prison systems. And so we're looking at an all-above approach to helping the most distressed communities. But more importantly, everything's anchored on this very, very important issue: jobs, right? Under President Trump's leadership, we've created over 7 million jobs that are unfilled all throughout the country. We've created over 10 million workforce and training opportunities for individuals to be connected into those jobs of the future. You know, we're working on things like paid family leaves. Paid family leave just passed this week, where if you're a federal employee, you get 12 weeks of paid family leave. You know, so it's about families. This week, we just announced a partnership with the Democrats on USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada Trade Agreement, which will bring 170,000 jobs back to the U.S. This is all extremely important because I come from a blue-collar community, and I saw what happened with these trade deals when those jobs picked up and went overseas, and my uncles and godfathers and individuals like that didn't have a job, and at the same time, you know, drugs were just spread throughout the community. And so we're working on both, trying to bring opportunity back and create opportunity now. But all that stuff is just fancy talk, infrastructure. I have a lot more to kind of talk about, you know, with education, with entrepreneurship, with creating safe communities. We created the White House Opportunity Revitalization Council, which takes $20 billion of resources and puts it into those communities. But what's most important is that you all help me create that connectivity. Because all those terms and stuff and these initiatives mean nothing if the actual people on the ground don't get access to them.
That's right.
So that's why I'm here. I'm here to create that connectivity. I'm willing to come back as much as we need until that connection is made. Whether it's 100 jobs, 1,000 jobs, or tens of thousand jobs. Let's help make that connection for people. Because if we help one person, one family, you know, that's like 5 people that we help within that family.
That's right. That's right.
All right? And that changes communities like the one I grew up in. The community I grew up in has changed so much, not in a positive way. You know, I'll talk a little bit about that at the City Club, but the last 5 years, I lost 5 people I grew up with. 5. You know, some of the best people ever. You know, we all played football together. You know, played till the street lights went out. You know, and to hear stories about how they got caught up and we lost them, or you know, they did something that hurt someone else. You know, it hurts me. You know, it should hurt you because you got children and grandchildren, you know, who are also connected in that ecosystem. And so it's not really about Republican and Democrat. It's about people.
That's right.
So I'll stop there and take some questions.